Okay, so hey everyone, and thank you all for coming for another webinar in our series. And today I'm very excited because it's one of my favorite webinars, and that is led by Iris. Iris, say hi.
Hey everyone!
And so without further ado, let's get started.
Okay, so hi, I'm Iris. I'm the Chief Graphic Designer here at MoMinis. I'm very excited that you all joined us for this webinar this evening. I've been working at MoMinis for about 2.5 years. All the games we currently have in the market, I was to some extent involved in their graphic design. So I learned a thing or two along the way, and I hope you'll find my advice useful. So what I want to start with is to say a couple of words about the tools I use in my work, which are mostly Photoshop and Flash. Not very special, I know. Flash is actually an excellent tool for 2D vector animations. One of its advantages is the way it uses tweens, which actually means that the animator has to create only keyframes, and Flash will create the in-betweens for you, and we'll see later on an example for how it's done. But I wanted to say in this context that for mobile phone graphic art, since everything is very small and we also have to live with some strong memory limits, we usually end up using only keyframes. So Flash kind of loses its advantage in that way, but I still use it quite a lot just to get a sense of how things work together, and we'll see that later on. What I want to emphasize when I'll show you some live examples, but don't feel bad if you can't follow all the details, because the idea here is not to give you a kind of Flash tutorial, but to show you what you can do, and if you're interested, then later on you can watch specific tutorials and see how to do that. So what I would like you to actually take from this webinar is to get a sense of what you can do with Photoshop and Flash, get some ideas on fast and easy ways to create graphics for a game if you're not a professional designer, and I also want to give you some tips and guidelines for creating mobile graphic games. Mobile game graphics, I mean. Okay. So the topics I want to talk to you about are creating characters, creating backgrounds for your games, game objects, and UI. So let's start with characters. The most important thing I have to say about characters is just to keep it simple. Choose a character that's going to be easy for you to animate and that will also look good and clear on small screens. I'm going to start with an extreme example and show you an example about stickman figures.
So actually, stick figures are my favorite characters. I know that Iris sometimes is all in favor of creating something that is a bit more sophisticated and a bit more rich from the graphic standpoint. But as a kid, and, especially when mobile games were started to be created, these are the type of games that I really enjoyed playing. So I actually insisted that Iris will start by creating a very simple but very useful stick figure animation.
Okay, thanks Eyal for your input. I want to stress that the advantages of stickman figures are that they're very easy to create. Basically anyone can do them, and you can reach a fairly smooth animation that is very hard to do with more complex characters. Okay, so I'm just opening up a file that contains animations for one of the first games I designed at MoMinis. It's called Ninja Run, in case some of you know it. And these are what the animations look like. Now I'm going to show you how to create a very simple run animation from scratch. We're going to open up a new file. I'm going to name this character Runner. And we'll start by creating a simple keyframe of just a classic run frame. I'm doing this using a Wacom pen, but you can do it using a normal mouse. Okay, so again, just your classic running frame. I'm going to add a new frame now, and I'm going to use the cool feature Flash has that's called onion skin. You can see it right here. And what it allows you to do is see the previous frame while you're drawing the next one. So for the next frame, I'm just going to separate, kind of spread them out a little bit. Yet another frame. I'm going to make his legs come back together, and the arms as well. And for the last frame, we only have 4 frames in this loop. It's going to be actually really the first part of the next step. Okay, so I'm going to let go of the onion skin now, and let's see how that came out. Not much to see because it's a very short loop, but it's very important to put things in context. So what I'm going to do is just make him run across the screen, and it's a good opportunity to show you about Tweeny and Flash. So this is going to be his surface, and I'm going to take my runner, put him here. I'm going to give him 30 frames to run across the screen, and in the 30th frame I'm just going to put him on the other side. Now what I'm going to do is mark all of these frames and choose Create Classic Tween, and as you can see, it just creates all the in-betweens for me. So let's see how that looks. Okay, it's a little fast. But basically we have a running loop of a figure running across the screen, and you saw me do this in 3 minutes right now. There are a lot of variations. This is a very, very simple run cycle. But if we go back to the Ninja Run animation, you'll see that here I did this animation in 16 frames, and it gives you really a smoother look. So again, this is a very simple example. I encourage you to read more about running loops and running cycles and walking cycles. It's going to be very, very useful for your character animations. Okay, so you're not always going to use a stick figure. I want to show you how some advice on creating your own branded character. And again, the most important thing I have to say is to still keep it simple. I think it's important to choose a body that's going to be easy to animate, and let's see my inspiration, the most successful games in the market. Look at the birds and Angry Birds and the pigs. and also Omnom from Cut the Rope. You can see how their bodies are very, very round, their faces are big, and they're extremely easy to animate because, well, basically they don't have hands and legs. So making your character as round as possible is a very good idea. Another good point is to make sure it looks good when it's small. And again, if you give it a large face, it's going to be easier for the user to attach to. These are just some examples of my favorite MoMinis characters. Bouncy Bill, Bubble Monkey, Ninja Chicken, Hungry Fish, the Penguin from Jelly Jam, Katoomba, and Ninja Run, which I just showed you. And I hope you can see how they implement those ideas of having a large face, clean lines, and a round body. I want to show you a very simple example of how to animate a character that's not a stick figure. So let's take Bouncy Bill. And I'm going to show you how to create a very simple idle animation. Now keep in mind that this can be something that you drew, or this can be something that you bought and you're playing around with. I'm going to talk to you later about buying some stock images for your games. I'm a strong believer in that. So let's see what we can do with them. Okay, I'm going to show you there's a feature in Photoshop that also allows you to create animations. I'm going to open that window right now, so just click Window Animation. And I'm starting to work on the next frame for my turtle. I'm going to choose the groups for the head, the tummy, and the back, basically everything except the legs, and just bring them a bit down, the head a little bit more so. And I'm also going to create a blink frame. Now what I want to say about blinking is that it's so simple to do, and it adds so much to your character that it's practically a crime not to do it. So let's do that now. Just zooming in a bit. And that's it. Let's see how we can fit these together. I'm going to add a new frame just down here at the bottom. I'm going to duplicate this set a few times, and in one of them I'm going to have Bill blink. So let's watch how that looks. Okay, so we have a really simple idle animation for your character. Now another thing I want to show you is how to create the animation of Bill falling down. If some of you know the game, then, well, there's an actual animation for that. Basically, all I really need is for his mouth to look a bit scared. Like this. And I'd like to have his legs kind of flapping around in helplessness. So I've actually gone ahead and exported all these parts. You see it's really simple, just frame for the body, 2 frames for the blink, and the legs. And I'm going to open them up in Flash. Now, I have this complex file that I made in advance with all the symbols. I'm not going to get into that, but basically what we have here is just the parts of the turtle. As you can see, we have the body, the legs and the face. So what I want to do is create the leg flapping animation that I told you about. So I'm going to turn this leg into a symbol. And the first thing I'm going to do is create the kind of the pivot, which I will rotate the leg around. So this is what this dot represents. I'm going to give this animation 20 frames. Create a keyframe at the end so it'll end the same way it starts to create a loop. And in the middle frame, I'm just going to create the rotation. So what we have now is kind of this situation, but let's see another example of Tweeny and Flash. All I have to do is choose the layers and create classic tween to create this motion. Another thing that's good to know is that it's very easy to control the acceleration of the motion in Flash. That's what I'm doing right now to make it look a little less mechanic. And we get this kind of motion. For the second leg, really all I have to do is create a copy of the first one and flip it. So this is what I have. I'm going to make it a little bit faster. And, well, I don't know if you noticed, but it kind of looks more like swimming right now. So what I want to do is create a timing difference between the legs. I'm going to give this animation 20 frames. And I want one of the legs to start the animation at the first frame, and the other leg to start it in the middle. So now we have this. Remember what I told you about blinking? Really important not to forget. So now we have the blinking as well. And all that's left for me to do is to actually watch Bill fall. Bear with me. And this is what we got. A really simple turtle falling animation, and you see there really wasn't a lot of drawing put into it. So if you're more on the technical side, use it to your advantage because there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do. Okay, so we had a few pointers about how to create characters for your mobile game. And I want to move on to our next subject, which is creating the backgrounds for your games. Well, what I wanted to talk to you about is that I'm a really firm believer in going shopping, and I mean shopping for vector art because that's something that's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of effort, will give you good results, and will allow you to really spend your energy where you need to. So I'm going to show you a cool example. We're going to stick with Bill, and I'm going to show you how I made the background for the latest version of Bouncy Bill, the Bouncy Bill Halloween version. Okay, so basically this is what the game looks like. For the background, well, I was looking around and I found a few things that I liked. This one, very simple, very classy for Halloween. Another example. I really like the color scheme in this one, kind of the big moon with the halo, and this one is my favorite because it really has the Halloween spirit. What I did was go ahead and buy this vector art. I'm going to open it up. And there are a few things that I had to adjust. So basically for the game, you can see this is a landscape image, and I wanted to work on a portrait game. So the first thing I need to do is to change the proportions to 480 on 800. And then basically all I had to do was just move some stuff around to make it fit. So let's see how we do that. I'm not going to actually use this sky, but I'm just going to keep it around for now so we get the feeling. I love this castle in the background, so I'm going to make it really big. I'm not going to use these stones. And let's see. This actually is going to be the left border of the screen. I also wanted to make it bigger. And the right side as well. Now, I'm not going to need this tree at all, but on the other hand, I really like this tree in the corner, so let's bring it back to the center. I need to adjust this just a little bit. And basically that's it. Now I have a background with the right proportions. I went ahead and exported the parts to Photoshop so I can work more comfortably on the other stuff I want to change. So this is what we had in Illustrator. These are the images exported into Photoshop. I'm going to close the animation window. And, well, like I said, I really like the color scheme in this one because this one seems a little lifeless to me. So I'm going to work on how to make the image I bought have the same kind of feeling as this one. Let's start by adding a sky. I'm going to use, one thing I'm going to use a lot here are the Photoshop blending options. So if you just right click a layer, you can choose blending options, and it's really useful. So for the sky, I'm just going to choose the same blue color we have here. And then I'm going to work on giving the moon this kind of bright halo. So I'm going to use the gradient tool and choose the radial option. And just kind of do this a few times until I like the colors. Okay. I also want to give a little bit of emphasis to this tree here that I liked. Now I kind of feel that this image is missing depth, so what I'm going to do is give each layer a color according to how close it is to the screen. So the castle, which is most in the back, I want to give it a color that's kind of like the sky. So I'm going to use color overlay, the same color of the sky, but I'm going to use the overlay option so you can see it kind of just gives it the hue you want. And you can also play with the opacity. This is kind of in the middle, so I'm going to leave it as it is. And for the left side, which is at the front, I want to give it a more kind of earthy color to make it seem closer. So it's the same trick, just use the overlay blending mode, not so strong. And I want to give this another emphasis, so I'm going to do this really roughly, just choosing a live color. And I'm actually drawing on the areas that I want to emphasize that they're close. I feel it kind of gives it a little bit more depth. Okay. There you go, but we're not finished yet. This is really, really easy to do. And every time I do this, it makes me think about the Van Gogh Starry, Starry Night. Just adding simple stars. Really can't be easier. And then with the blending options, I give them a glow. That's a little bit more like it. Now I'm going to close the reference and open up a few more files that I'm going to need. These are the clouds from the original version of Bouncy Bill, and of course pumpkin, because it's not Halloween without a pumpkin. Okay, so remember what I said about blinking with characters? It's the same thing with clouds in a background. The easiest thing you can do is have a cloud in the background kind of moving around, and it really adds a lot to the game. What we have to do is change their color to make it more suitable. So by clicking Control U, I can control the colors. I'm just going to make it blue and use the opacity to make it more kind of foggy. I'm doing that with all three of them. And then all you have to do is just imagine them moving around while you're playing the game. Then we have our pumpkin, which I'm going to gently hang from the tree. Has to be in front of the castle, right? Their color is right now a little bit too dramatic, so I'm just going to tone it down a bit. And tie them up. Okay. One last touch. And this is actually a good tip. You can download loads of brushes for free for Photoshop. So I'm going to use this star-shaped brush and just add a little glow. And you can animate this, just have a star glow from time to time. Adds a nice touch. And that's it. Have a nice Halloween background for your game. But that's just a static background, and I wanted to show you an example for a side-scroller background because that's pretty common as well. So I chose Ninja Chicken for this example. Just a second. Okay. So first of all, let's see how this looks. You might be seeing this a little bit choppy, but I hope you get the idea. There are a few things I wanted to point out about this background. First of all, some of the elements I used here are periodical elements, like this hill in the back. But when you're creating your game, you can't really use one continuous, endless object. So what you actually see here is a periodical object. This is one hill, and I just have to create it in a way that it will fit with another instance of itself perfectly. So one side has to match the other side. In this example, I actually went a step further and only used one half of the hill. That way you can mirror it and save yourself some memory space. So using periodical objects is very useful for side-scrolling backgrounds. Another thing I wanted you to notice is the difference in the speed of the layers. Okay, I'm moving this along right now. I'm not sure if you can really, how much you can see from the webinar, but I want you to notice how the bushes at the front move faster than the trees at the back, and how the bigger clouds move faster than the smaller clouds that are more distant. This is a very useful way to give depth to your background. So if you're using several layers, which I recommend, make sure that you give the furthest layers the slowest speed. And that's called a parallax background. Okay, so moving along to the next subject. Now that you have a character and a background for your game, you're still going to need some stuff like pickups and obstacles and some general game objects. So I'm going to show you a cute example from the game Bubble Monkey. This is a screenshot from the game, and these are the bubbles that the monkey has to pop. And it's really very easy to create them, and I think they came out kind of nicely. So I wanted to show how that was done. Again, here there's just a lot of work with Photoshop blending options. So not surprisingly, we're going to start with a simple circle. In the Christmas spirit, I'm going to choose a red color for it. And for the stroke, I usually use a color similar to the shape, only a bit darker. And I just wanted to say in general that strokes are a good idea for mobile game graphics because it keeps things clearer when they're small. And also the dark outlines usually work better than bright ones. I'm going to add a shadow to this. You can play around with the distance and the size. And I'm going to add a little bit of shine to it. So for this, I actually want only the effect. I don't want this color. So I'm going to reduce the fill opacity to 0. And all you're going to see here is only the gradient overlay. The gradient gives you an option to control both the colors and also the opacity. So you can really play around with it. So as you can see, you already have a nice bubble right here, but I want to give it that extra shine. Just going to color this in white and give it a little bit of glow. Okay, so that's even nicer. And what I really like to do is, well, you see this is a perfectly rounded circle. Almost all the objects I use in my game have kind of a customized feeling. I don't like things to be completely round or completely rectangular. So I'm going to use the pen tool, which is a bit hard to learn, but it's worth it. And once you know it, it's very, very easy to use, to create a kind of pattern on the bubble. And the pattern is also going to give it that customized feeling, and it's going to emphasize the fact that it's round. Okay, so I created a path. I'm just going to fill it. And now we have a few problems. First of all, the shape I did kind of gets out of the circle. So I'm going to use the actual original circle, just control and click it to select it, and then use it as a mask. I'm using this small icon at the bottom to mask the pattern I made. And now it fits inside the ball. The second problem is that the shadow kind of conflicts with my pattern, and that's because right now it's below the pattern. So I'm going to duplicate the layer and eliminate everything but the shadow. Now it's on top. I'm going to remove the shadow from the bottom, and I'm going to choose a slightly darker color. Control U gives you the hue saturation dialog, which is also very useful. I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. And that's it. You have your bubble monkey bubble. The cool thing about this is that if you want to create several in different colors, then now it's really, really easy. I just duplicated the layers and merged them. And now with the same hue saturation dialog, I can create different colors. So you can get a really nice variety of bubbles. Also, it's worth to know the image adjustment brightness contrast, very useful, and allows you to control brightness and contrast, not surprisingly. So that's how you create the bubbles for Bubble Monkey. And I want to remind you this is also a good place to go shopping for pickups and all sorts of collectibles and obstacles in your game. The last thing I wanted to talk about was UI, which is very important, because actually the core gameplay isn't all of the graphic work you're going to have to do. A lot of the work is going into designing menus and dialogues for your game. And I'm going to show you an example from Ninja Chicken. This shows most of the UI for the game. There's a splash at the game opening. There are the controls and buttons for the game itself. I'm not sure you got to see the splash. Okay, so there it is. The controls and buttons for the game itself. The level selection, a main menu for the game, and usually you'll have all sorts of dialogues. So I want to point out a few things. The most important thing about creating UI is to create a unified cross-game experience for the user. you want to really make him feel like everything is connected. So I want you to notice a few things. First of all the buttons in the dialogues have the same style, and this is the same style I used also for the control buttons. Another thing is that if you have a branded character, use it as much as you can. Here you can see I used it in the rate dialogue, and also in the level selection, and of course in the main menu. Now the big buttons for the main menu and the level selection were inspired from actual game objects, which I think is always a good idea. So that's about the unified experience. Two additional small points that I wanted to point out is, well, a call to action. Try not to have too many buttons on the same dialogue because it's going to confuse the user. And if you use different colors for buttons, make it mean something. I mean, you should give the brighter colors to the buttons that you want the user to choose. So try to guide him through the experience of your game. In this example, you can see that the Right Now button is brighter than the other button, and we could have been even more extreme and have the No Thanks button completely grayed out, but still clickable. The last thing is that try to notice that to design all of your dialogues in the same size, because you'd be surprised how much memory space people waste in their games just on dialogue boxes. So I think it creates a better experience for the user and also saves you memory space if you just use one image for all of the dialogues. And you can even go further, and in this case use only half of it and mirror it just to save space. So basically that's all I wanted to go through with this webinar. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So in the usual routine that we have, if you have any questions to ask Iris, we'll spend the next couple of minutes answering all of your questions. You can also ask anything about the contest, the development tools, but try to stay focused on what we showed you today. And again, thank you, Iris, for this wonderful webinar. Everybody else, you can find it on the website in a couple of days. So we'll give you just a few moments to ask your questions, and then we can go ahead. So just a couple of more minutes, seconds. Okay, we already see a couple of questions, so just a sec. Okay, so let's start with the first question. So how do you balance between buying graphics and creating original graphics of your own?
Basically, well, that's a good question. It really depends on the time you have to create your graphics. A lot of people would prefer to create everything on their own, but if you have time limitations or any resources limitations, then you would buy more stock art. I usually actually buy stock art anywhere I can, and then use my time to create original graphics for the things that really matter, which are usually the characters in my game or anything that I couldn't find something that I was happy enough with. Usually the UI is also something that you can't really replace with purchased graphics. But anything from backgrounds to obstacles and mostly static objects, it can always be a good idea to buy them.
Okay, so additional question was about the software that you've been using during the webinar. So maybe you can just name all the different softwares.
Yeah, sure. Some of the examples were done in Photoshop, and well, the vector art that I bought and kind of took apart was that part was done in Illustrator, and the animations with the tweening was done in Flash.
Okay, additional question was about the whole space memory with mirror technique.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Oh, okay. So, well, basically, when creating graphics for mobile phones, you have a real memory limit. A lot of the times we create all the graphics for the game and then find ourselves looking for ways to minimize the file size. So a good way to do that is work with symmetrical objects. Sorry about that. Symmetrical objects that you can just cut apart and use parts of them and mirror them, and that way save yourself just image space.
Okay. Another question was about the legal rights of using the stock art.
Well, you really have to pay attention to the contract when you're buying stock photography or stock art of any kind. Usually it says you can't sell them again as they are or distribute them free as they are, but there's no problem in creating using parts of the art in the game, or even, you can even buy a whole character from stock art. Sometimes they come along with animations, like with walk cycles, and you can use that in your game as long as you don't distribute it to other people. But of course, you should read the guidelines in the site you buy from.
What about recommending a website you can use in order to buy those graphics?
Well, I usually use Fotolia. Well, basically it's very convenient, and they have good prices. But there are a lot of stock sites out there, so anyone could be good. Well, I see a question about color scheme selection. That's actually a really interesting question, because a lot of times that's what's going to make the difference between something that looks, well, bad and good. What I want to say is I tend to prefer a color scheme that's easy on the eye, even if it seems less beautiful, because if you stare at it for a long time, it's just going to be, it's going to feel more comfortable and more pleasing. So try to use soft colors. I use a lot of pastels. Another thing is that for the UI, I usually choose colors that are not very saturated, and also I think a lot of times when I start a game, I just look at examples, do searches for Google Images and in stock art sites, just to choose a color scheme that I like from the start. And then you can, like I showed with the Halloween background, I chose one image that I like the image itself, and then another image where I like the color scheme.
And by the way, from the marketing standpoint, it's important to understand that the users that are playing the games are very, well, we have a very ideogenic population playing our games. So, for instance, you have kids and you have their parents and you have teenagers. So you need to choose something everybody likes. And we have something we call the crystal effect. We always aim to get something that the first time you look at it, it looks very beautiful and very calming. So this is, just have to keep in mind that you are targeting the lowest common denominator of all the different age groups. So there is another question about the fact that the products, Illustrator, Flash, and Photoshop, are a bit costly. Do you know of any software that are a bit more, let's maybe even free?
I know there are out there, but actually I don't really know to recommend a specific one. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So another question. I noticed that the background example was pre-animated in Flash. Would this be considered standard procedure, or rooms usually animate a studio program in the studio program? This is something that is more, I think, a development question. I mean,
Yeah,
but
well, usually I just, as I mentioned, I use Flash to kind of test how animations would feel and look, where how things interact together. But the actual animation is done in the programming in the studio. I just do that to make sure I'm happy with what I created before I give that to the programmer.
yeah, this is a very important note to make because you should not, in any case, animate the movement of the background yourself. You're just going to blow up the memory space of the animation to an unimaginary size that is in no way can, mobile device can use. So as Iris just said, Flash is meant only in order to preview the animation, and we do that a lot in MoMinis, but the programming and the movement itself is done in the MoMinis studio.
I see a question about how to create original backgrounds without using stock art. Well, that's really a very individual topic because I always like to use some kind of example. I don't always use stock art and use that, but sometimes I'll use a stock image just as a basis, or even just, like I said, find an example in a Google search just for colors I like, or anything that would give you inspiration on how your background should look like. And of course that also depends on your drawing skills, because for some people that comes very naturally, and some people would have an easier time just buying something.
I do have to say that working with different developers for a long time now, it is recommended to sometimes, if especially if it's your first game, not to create everything from scratch. It's going to take a lot of time, and some of the times you're not going to meet the quality that you are targeting. So maybe, even if you're not buying anything prepared, you can just use it as a reference and maybe use some of the elements in the graphics that you like.
I think it's kind of a good way using some kind of reference, and again, you don't actually have to actually use the stock art, but having some kind of reference gives you more certainty of how your product eventually is going to look, because sometimes you start something from scratch and you have some kind of image in your head, but you see that it's not really developing in the same direction.
Yeah. So there's a question about whether you have a YouTube channel where you can find your tutorials, and another question before was whether this webinar is going to be online. So you can go to gamecastcontest.com. This is the Gamecast Contest website, and on the right-hand side you can also click on the webinars button, where we publish most of our recent webinars. So this webinar and also the next ones are going to be uploaded to our website.
I see the question here also asks if I can recommend a channel to watch tutorials. So I really want to say that I learned everything I know about Photoshop and Flash just by watching tutorials. I think it's a very useful way. And just make a search. You'll probably find, you'll be surprised at what you'll find. And if I had to recommend something specific, then there's a site called lynda.com. It's not free, but it's a fair price, and it's really good tutorials.
So we have time for a quick last question. Let's just choose one. Any quick advice for game title text? So this is, I guess that I'm trying to figure out whether the question is referring to choosing the right font for the main menu or choosing the title for your game, which is completely unrelated to this webinar.
I'm going to assume it's the title itself.
It's a title. So this is actually, if it's about the title, you want to choose something that is related to the game but also invokes the right emotion from the players. And we usually try to find something that is amusing, funny, and also creates adrenaline. But I now see that the uh, the answer was referring to the font choice.
Okay, so I'll try to answer that, though I don't really have something specific in mind. Uh, but generally, it's the small stuff, like I said before, with the pattern on the bubbles. You can use just a normal font, but give it that kind of special angle, give it a special pattern, um, and make it look unique.
And by the way, going backward to the selection of the title itself, try to make something that can really intertwine with the text of the game, the name of the game. So, for instance, we have the Ninja Chicken game that is called.
I'm going to show you again.
So the long name of the game is the Funky Chicken Who Thought He Was a Ninja, and Iris has really very intelligently selected a font that is funky, and also added a few touches above the C, as you can see here. So again, these are the small touches that you have in your game that makes the text really stand out and look a little bit more special. Okay, so I think our time is up. Guys, first of all, again, Iris, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And second of all, thank you all for coming. We have another webinar tomorrow in Russian for those of you who prefer learning about the MoMinis Studio in your native tongue, if you do speak Russian. And the next one is on Thursday about more advanced features in the MoMinis Studio. I hope to see you all there, and thank you again for coming. Have a nice evening, and Iris, thank you.
Well, thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.